On RN, this is Between the Lines with Tom Switzer.
Well, there's no shortage of analysis of what Australia did wrong to China to cause Beijing's wrath. And there's no shortage of advice on how Canberra should set the relationship right. But underlying all the criticism, according to my next guests, is a failure to recognise the nature of the Chinese communist threat and Canberra's justified response. Now, two senators have been leading the resistance to Beijing's attempts to interfere in our sovereignty and its campaign of economic coercion against Australia. Labor's Kimberley Kitching and Liberals' James Paterson, both are from Victoria. Kimberley, James, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much, Tom. It's great to be here.
Now, James, let's start with you. You're part of an informal cross-party grouping, along with Kimberley, known as the Wolverines. Tell us about this group and how it came to be.
Tom, it first got its start back in 2017 when the Turnbull government was contemplating ratifying a long-dormant, previously negotiated extradition treaty with the People's Republic of China. And a number of us across the political spectrum had deep concern about that proposal. We didn't think it was fair to send anyone to face a justice system with a 99.9% conviction rate, and many of us were worried that it would be another tool of coercion against the Chinese-Australian diaspora. And from the backbench, a revolt on that policy started and eventually defeated that policy and prevented it from proceeding. And from there, a group of us who were predominantly younger, were all backbenchers, realised that there was something wrong with executive decision-making on the China relationship in our country, and that we had to set ourselves a task of fixing that. And so an informal grouping formed. It was very tongue-in-cheek. Certainly the name was tongue-in-cheek, but we had a very serious task. And I think if you look back over the last 4 or 5 years, there's been really a sea change in that relationship and Australia's approach to it.
Why Wolverines?
It goes back to a 1980s film, Red Dawn, where a Soviet invasion of the United States is resisted by a group of high school teenagers who call themselves the Wolverines after their football team. So that's why I say it's very tongue-in-cheek. We don't literally think we are resisting a communist invasion, but we do think we've got a very serious challenge on our hands, and we have come a long way.
Now, when the Wolverines were set up a few years ago, I mean, the consensus was so different. As you say, our political leaders insisted that Australia, we didn't need to make a choice between going with China or going with the Americans. Now, of course, in recent times, Canberra has judged that China has made the choice for us. Kimberley, what happened?
Look, I think that we were, to use John Garneau's thesis, we were the canary in the coal mine. China targeted us with trade coercion in order to pursue political revenge, which would have had the effect to undermine our sovereignty. And I think, and also for us to capitulate to their political demands. And it did not work. And yes, there are some issues with our wine industry and with lobster, but these are very specialised markets. And I mean, in relation to Australian wine, I mean, you're looking at wine that is sought the world over. So the idea that we would be dumping wine in a market, in this case, the Chinese Communist Party said we were dumping wine in China, it is nonsensical. We've gone to the World Trade Organization through the arbitration process on the barley that China also loaded with tariffs. I think there are also, the 14 grievances. I think that we're very used to a country, if they're unhappy with another country, that the process is that you would go to see probably the Minister for Foreign Affairs. But in this case, the Chinese embassy handed a list of 14 grievances to a journalist. So these are, that was, I think, also a surprise, and also really showed a lack of knowledge of a democratic system because, for example, one of the demands was, that the government should stop unfriendly reporting on China by the Australian media. But, the three of us know that, of course, that Australian media is free. It's a free media and they can print, within the limits of the law, particularly probably defamation law. The Australian media is able to print what it wishes and to have stories on what it wants. So, that's a hallmark of a democratic system. But, also their wolf warrior diplomacy, their foreign ministry spokesperson, Zhao Lijian, is probably the chief wolf warrior. the language is not, for a power. China has a large economy. It's very surprising, I think, to hear some of the language from their spokespeople.
Yeah, but your critics would tell a different story. They'd say that Australia, that our government has poked at the bear by the way our leaders have implemented things like the foreign interference laws, the rejection of the Huawei bid, the call for an international inquiry into the COVID origins. You'll often hear this critique on the ABC. James Paterson, couldn't more sophisticated and nuanced diplomacy, as the critics say, couldn't that have helped soothe any tensions?
No, I don't think so, Tom, because fundamentally what we have here is really, at its core, a clash of systems. The Chinese political system does not respect or understand the Australian political system and feels it can make demands of us that we could never agree to. And the 14 grievances that Kimberley talked about is a perfect example of that. All of those go to our core as a sovereign liberal democracy making decisions in our own interest. And what is being asked of us, we could never acquiesce to. And so it's not actually the tone or the way in which it's done that matters, it's the substance. There's no nice way to exclude Huawei from your 5G network if you believe in protecting your digital sovereignty. You can't say that in a particularly polite phrase and ensure that there's going to be no offence caused. It's going to cause offence because it's a fundamental disagreement. And the sooner that we accept that and acknowledge that, the better that we will be, because we can be managing this relationship from the basis of reality, not the basis of fantasy.
This is Between the Lines with Tom Switzer.
James Paterson and Kimberley Kitching are senators from Victoria. Kimberley is with the Labor Party, while James is with the Liberal Party. Now, one of the leading critics of Australia's approach towards China has been Paul Keating, the former Labor Prime Minister. Now, he says that the AUKUS agreement not just needlessly provokes China, but it, and these are his words, quote, restaples us to the Anglosphere. This is the world of the Atlantic, while stridently turning its back on our geography, Asia, in the same awkward moment. That's Paul Keating, James Paterson.
The most terrible thing you can say about Paul Keating is that he's 30 years out of date with his intelligence and security briefings. But I fear that even if he had up-to-date briefings, that he would still be wedded to this worldview, because fundamentally it's an ideological one. And he's committed to his 1990s vision of Australia in Asia and Australia having a prosperous, peaceful relationship with China. We all wish we had a prosperous, peaceful relationship with China, but it's just not real world, and it hasn't kept up with the latest developments. It doesn't acknowledge the reality of Xi Jinping's China, which is very different from Hu Jintao's China, let alone Deng Xiaoping's China. And if you don't acknowledge that reality, if you can't see what's happened in Hong Kong, what's happened to the Uyghurs, what's happened in Tibet, if what's happening in the South China Sea, what's happening with political interference in our own democracy, then I'm afraid there's no talking sense to you.
Yeah, but Keating represents the views of a lot of people in the business community, academic historians, former diplomats, and they say that the rise of China is a welcome development. This is the line, this is Keating's words. This represents, quote, the rise of 20% of humanity from abject poverty into something approaching a modern state. Kimberley Kitching, how would you respond to Paul Keating?
Look, I think that firstly, Paul Keating agreed that Huawei should be banned from our system. He also has said on numerous occasions that the Chinese Communist Party puts a brake on achieving the GDP that it could achieve because the Chinese Communist Party is more concerned with its own survival. And I think that this is a typical neo-Stalinist reaction, which is what the Chinese Communist Party is. They are much more concerned with their own survival, even to the cost to their own people. So I think really the Chinese Communist Party, when you look back post-World War II, you look to the Bretton Woods system, which was developed at that point after two devastating wars. Of course, liberal democracies wanted to have a system where they could have agreement around sort of financial and economic systems. And of course, we allowed China into that. They were allowed into the World Trade Organization as well. But I think that really the West or the democracies have actually helped China to bring people out of poverty because they've been able to trade with us. And, there's a reason why their economy is has been in excess of double digits for really the past 2 decades. because they've been able to grow their economy, because they've been able to trade with the West. And I think that, we should remember this. We've included them in our system. I feel really that they really feel that these systems are something that they can game in a way that they don't really feel that they've got much skin in that game, when of course they do, because that's how they've been able to grow their economy.
Yeah, but Keating's view reflects the views of some prominent intellectuals in East Asia. Kishore Mahbubani from Singapore, past guest on this program. We'll have him on soon to address AUKUS. Kishore, among others, and you'll hear this from Hugh White and many academic historians and the former diplomats, they all too often write opinion pieces. They'll say that most other countries in Asia don't share our view of China, and they fear that AUKUS just entrenches the idea that we've got a new Cold War in Asia, and they don't want to choose. James Paterson.
I think fundamentally they're just wrong on the facts. If you look at the way in which AUKUS was warmly welcomed by our closest friends and allies in Asia, in the Indo-Pacific, including Japan and India, but also the Philippines and others, Singapore is very comfortable with AUKUS. Certainly there have been people who've been less certain about it, Malaysia and Indonesia, to cite two examples. But I'm very confident that we can demonstrate to them that the capability, the military capability that we'll acquire under AUKUS, we will use not just to protect our interests and our values, but to help secure their interests as well. Because fundamentally, we believe in the sovereignty of states. We believe that you should be able to make decisions in your own best interest for your own country and decide the shape of your own future, and not have it dictated to you by others in the neighbourhood, no matter how large they are. And fundamentally, I think ASEAN will rally around that principle and will be grateful to have Australia's support in defending it.
What about, you talk about sovereignty, what about the charge that the agreement constitutes a dramatic loss of Australian sovereignty, James?
This is the argument that I find the most difficult to genuinely grapple with, because no one said that we lost sovereignty when we bought joint strike fighters from the United States. No one said we lost sovereignty when we bought frigates from the United Kingdom. Just because we're acquiring foreign military capability doesn't undermine our sovereignty. It supports our sovereignty. It gives us control over that military technology to use in our defence and under our sovereign control. We're going to be stronger and more secure because of it, not less. It's a very bizarre critique.
Yeah, but Keating says, and he's not alone again, that with AUKUS we've essentially turned over control of our armed forces, effective control of our foreign policy. We've turned all of that to the Americans. Kimberley Kitching.
Look, I don't agree with that. I think that, firstly, when I saw the press conference that morning, I thought it was fantastic. And the reason is because it's a recommitment to our values. We know the Indo-Pacific is probably going to be the region of strategic competition for the next era. And it's clear, I think, that we'll have to contribute more to our own security. I think the unipolar world that existed post-Soviet Union has gone. That's the Francis Fukuyama thesis. I think that's finished, and I think we'll have to commit to our own security and to ensure our own sovereignty. The committee that I chair in the Senate, the Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade References Committee, we've just passed a tabled a report into the quadrilateral relationship, and that actually says, and we found from the evidence that we had before us, that in fact we are not walking away from our region at all. That it's important. Organisations such as ASEAN are very important. So while we've got the Quad as well in our region, now AUKUS, I think that we're going to be working with countries that have been our close allies for a very, very long time. It was John Curtin, a Labor Prime Minister, wartime Prime Minister, who said, we look towards America and pivoted our foreign policy that way. And I think we've obviously have a very long history with the United Kingdom as well. So I don't think that there's any, turning away from, we're not handing over control at all. I think that we're actually working with friends.
Okay, finally, the Financial Review is reporting that business leaders remain confident of a breakthrough in relations with the highest levels of the Chinese government. James Paterson, you're from the Liberal Party, the party of business and markets and trade. Are you copping much pushback from the business constituency over the government's handling relations with China?
Not as much as we were 5 years ago, I can tell you, Tom. The business community has come an enormous way in those last 5 years, and I think they realise now, particularly in the campaign of economic coercion against Australia, that there is an attempt to use them against Australia's national interest. The whole point of that campaign is to squeeze as hard as possible so that the recipients squeal and put pressure on the government to change our policy. And now that business understands that, they're not going along with that, and I pay them great tribute. I have to say, though, I don't share their rosy optimism when it comes to a better relationship with China. I think we are in now the new normal, and I think sadly we're going to be subject to the kind of trade measures that we're under now for some time. We're going to be working our way through that, and we're going to be trying to provide as many other options through diversification as possible for our business community, but we have to adjust to the reality that China is going to use its economic might for political means for a very long time.
James, Kimberley, as always, it's great to have you on RN.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, James.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks, Kimberley.